My name is Ronen Barzel, which is an Israeli name, which I don't pronounce properly because my Israeli accent is not what it should be. And I was born in Israel, but I grew up in New York City from a very young age. I went to school as undergraduate at Brown University and got a master's, stayed there for a master's. And then I went to grad school shortly afterwards at Caltech and got my PhD there. And the bachelor's was in math and physics, and the master's and PhD were in computer science. My professional career, I did start out in math and physics because at the time in high school and going to college, computers were kind of a new thing, not the obvious choice for a nerdy kid like me. And when I got to college, I started doing more and more computers. And by the end of my undergraduate career, I had pretty much switched over to computer science, but I finished out math and physics because I had done enough of it as well. And I stayed on to do the master's. I figured that way I just covered all the ground. I finished college half a year out of sync, and I was looking for something to do in January before graduation. I heard back from David Salison, who had been at Brown, had left and was working in the computer graphics group at Lucasfilm. He called back to Brown, to Andy Van Dam, and said, "Hey, is anyone else in the lab who might be looking for work?" Bob Grevin and I both ended up taking jobs at Lucasfilm. We worked on the Pixar image computer, a little bit of microcoding and writing a paint program or like a layout program to run on the image computer in order, we're pushing to get it demoed by SIGGRAPH of '84, which was my first SIGGRAPH, to demo to George Lucas and Linda Ronstadt. After a year and a half, I left Lucasfilm and went to Caltech for my PhD. I stayed in touch with those folks. I probably a couple of times did, a summer job as that group's transitioned over to being Pixar. So I started working with the Pixar folks. Meantime, in grad school, I kind of dusted off some of my physics background and started working on what we called physically based modeling. Back then, there was a question of, is this even computer graphics? It's all just math and simulation and stuff. That question has been answered. And the field has moved way beyond what I was doing. The stuff I did was just like, baby physics compared to the kinds of things that go on now. Afterwards, I got a job at Silicon Graphics as a contractor working on Inventor, the Inventor toolkit. I had actually been wanting to do some production work. I had done my entire PhD in computer graphics without a single rendered image in it. I figured I should really get some hands-on experience. I was still in touch with the Pixar folks. 6 months after I was at Silicon Graphics, which I was actually just as a contractor because they didn't have headcount to hire anybody. But just as my contract was ending, Pixar got the green light to make Toy Story. I said, "Oh, perfect. I'll go make some images." At the time, Toy Story was not what it is now. I honestly expected that it would be bad because most computer graphics was bad. And I knew John Lasseter, and he'd made some of my favorite shorts ever. Luxo Jr. is to this day one of my favorite animations. But the difference between making a short and making a full-length movie is just, a very different set of skills, and no particular reason to believe that John was any good at it. But it turns out John was a master. He was great at movie making. I went to Pixar thinking I would work on the movie for, a year and a half or so, and then go do something else. Because after 7 years in grad school, I want to keep playing the field. But Pixar was too much fun. I stayed there for 14 years, I think, more or less, doing some of everything deliberately. I did Slinky Dog. I did some modeling. I did then a model of Slinky Dog, which they asked me to do because it had the Slinky in it and had that background in physics simulation. I said, "You do it." And my conclusion at the time was that it absolutely shouldn't be done with physics simulation because too slow, too hard, impossible to control. I did do physics simulation. I did all the physics simulation in Toy Story, not counting particle systems, which Bill Reeves did. And it was one quarter of a second thing of the rope swinging down when the little green soldiers, the jump rope off the edge. And that was one of the first shots finalized in the movie. That whole sequence was the first thing was done. And just doing that at the time, clearly simulation is not the way to animate. So I'd show it to John. He'd say, "Well, can you move it here? And just at the timing there." And I have to fiddle with physics parameters and gravity and friction and whatever else initial conditions to try to get it to look the way he wanted. So for Slinky Dog, I made kinematic controls that would make it easy. The idea is to let the animators animate, but make it easy for them to animate and not have to move control points. As John had done the chord in Luxo, which had little waves running through it, by animating the control points of the B-spline or Bezier, whatever it was. And he said that was a nightmare, and just animating the chord took as much time as everything else. I was proud of the fact that I got email from someone who actually did like study physics of slinkies and things, and he asked me what simulation programs we used to do that. And I did actually write a paper called Faking Dynamics of Ropes and Springs, where he talked about how I did that. One thing that's just really cool about being at Pixar, Ed and Alvy, of course, well, Alvy was gone by then, but Ed, Rob Cook, Lauren Carpenter, Tom Duffy, you got those people who are like, the gods and the founders and creators of computer graphics are there. I remember at some point, 16-year-old kid, animator from CalArts, came up to do a summer internship, and he said, I'm so excited to be here. Got such amazing people here. Got these gods here. And I was like, yeah, we got Lauren. And he said, you got Rich Quaid, and you have Pete Docter. And he mentioned all these animators who I'm like, oh, Pete's the guy. He's just the animator that's in the office next to me. That's just a guy, Pete Rich. I had no idea that the animators that they had are at the same level of stature and animation as the computer graphics people were in computer graphics. Each side had no idea who people on the other side were. There's just like, hey, guy to work with, they're good people to work with. So that was a fun thing about Pixar. So I built the model of Slinky Dog. The way you build the model, you get handed the character sheets, model sheets, and some drawings and some different poses. It was all procedural programming then. So, the spheres and the things and the bendies and to make the things out of rubber and make them bendable. And there are, 37 controls in each ear to make it and things, and the arms and the slinky, of course, and all that. And I demonstrated that it could go left, right, up, down, move the thing, all the kind of motions it could do. And then I handed it off to Rich Quaid, who was assigned to test out the model to make sure it could be, make sure it's ready for animation. And he disappeared for a couple of days and came back. I looked on his screen, my jaw dropped because he had literally brought it to life. Like there was a dog on the screen walking around like a dog, and I was just floored. Never in a million years could I do what he did. And I was just so in awe of what he did. After my awe wore off, I kind of realized, but you know what? Never in a million years could he do what I did. And that moment of like, we created something that's bigger than either of us. It was a really powerful moment. That's analogous to what SIGGRAPH tries to do, bringing together of the different fields. I deliberately moved from modeling to shading. I did the shader on Buzz's helmet, which was reflective everywhere except for where his face was, so you could see his face and not see the reflections. And then I moved into lighting. Did a bunch of lighting, and I learned lighting from Ralph Eggleston. I lit the inside of the pizza van when Woody is kind of like having a fight with the toolbox. And the reason for that is it was very technical because all the lights had to be moving. And so and I had to time the motion of the lights, so there'd be light on his face every time he had an interesting expression and light on the toolbox. And so because lighting required programming back then, and getting the lights to move around stuff required programming, they had me as one of the people in the lighting team do that. And that's a segue into, at the end of Toy Story, when Pixar decided, it's not just one movie, we're going to keep making other movies. And to Ed Catmull's credit, I love one of the things he said after Toy Story. He said, everyone was reveling in success, and he said in a company meeting, I hope that Toy Story is the worst movie we ever make. As the movies went on, I didn't want to keep being in production. I wanted to go into tool development. Movie making for me is more craft work, but weirdly, software development is more creative. In software development, it's like my decisions and my ideas and my things, whereas in the movie making production work, it's someone else's ideas, someone else's decisions, and I'm executing them. But for me, software development was ultimately more satisfying, and production is just a fun thing to do now and then. And the only reason it made any sense to do for me to do lighting in Toy Story is because I knew how to program, because I had no background in lighting and photography and anything. So I had to learn that on the job, and I did okay, but I'm never going to be a master at it. I kind of always saw my role as make it possible for other people to do things. So that was my career. And at some point, I got involved in SIGGRAPH. I ended up being on the SIGGRAPH 2004 committee, where I was the chair of the Sketches program, as it was called. Now it's just called Talks. The idea was there are plenty of interesting things to talk about that aren't groundbreaking research, and so there should be a venue for that. I think Andrew Glassner created that. So I was chair of that, and one of the things that we did on the committee, that the research paper bar was too high. It made it hard for new research to get published before it's reached that level of sophistication. And so we decided we should do a posters program. And I think because, I was the one who spoke up and said we should do a posters program, I became its chair. I got so great, you do it. So I created and chaired the first posters program for SIGGRAPH 2004. I remember being in the committee and seeing Dina Slathauer, who was the chair at the time, and thinking, well, I'm glad I don't have her job. I hate to be chair of this committee. That just looks awful. All this stuff with budgeting and which I'm terrible at and hate doing. And so then I got this tap on the shoulder. He's saying, "You want to apply to be conference chair?" And I was like, "No, I don't want to do that. You have to do all this budgeting stuff and stuff. I'm just really bad at that." He said, "No, you don't have to do that. There are people who do that for you." And I said, "Oh yeah, but that's what Dina did. She spent all the time doing that." And they said, "Oh, that's because Dina likes doing budgeting, but you don't have to do budgeting if you don't want to." And so, I got talked into applying and got accepted. Well, Jacqueline Martino is 2008, and I think we both applied for 2008 at the same time, and they decided to accept us both simultaneously. And she did 2008, and I did 2009, and then we kind of worked together as we kind of revamped the entire submission process. The SIGGRAPH had become very siloed. You submit here, or you submit there, and there was very little crossover between the committees. The submissions had to go to one thing or the other. You couldn't submit to more. We thought that wasn't. We thought that the conference was going to, like I said, too solid, too splintered. So we spent a few years kind of thinking about it and revamping with help from the entire committee, and the advisory group. There's mostly one central submission. You submit to the conference and you check off which areas you want to be considered for. Yeah, so that way something can be accepted for a talk or for a poster, or that type of thing, which is common, it's common at other conferences, but hadn't been done that way at SIGGRAPH. Because 2008 was okay, and the crash came between 2000 and 2009. The only positive financial record that it set was it set a record for cancellation fees from vendors, because all these people signed up to go to the conference the year before, and then the economy crashed and nobody showed up, and they all had to pay their cancellation fees. And so we had a very small conference. So the academic community attendance is fairly constant. Back then it was around 4,000 or 5,000 people were the academics, and they'd show up every year to the conference. And the conference attendance otherwise would be anywhere between 20 to 50,000 depending on the year and the city and stuff like that. But the core group would always show up. So same thing happened in New Orleans. The core group showed up. So we had 10,000 people, maybe, I forget, a small number compared to the usual 20s and 30s and so on. So it was a much more modest conference. That was of course disappointing, but the people who were there, enjoyed it as far as I know. I mean, it went off well and the content was good, but we had a special focus on visualization and on music. I remember bringing in as keynote speakers, Randy Tom of ILM, who's a sound designer. He talked about sound design. I thought he gave a really cool talk. And I forget his name, fellow who's in charge of the visualizations for the New York Times web, online things. They always have beautiful animated visualizations, and so he came in and talked about those.
Okay, my name is Will Wright. I've been making games for, longer than I want to admit. Designed games like SimCity, The Sims, most recently Spore. Just left Electronic Arts to start my own startup called the Stupid Fun Club, where we're going to be doing things beyond games.
One of the only contributions to content that you do as a conference chair is suggesting the keynote speakers. So that was my contribution to content. I think so. It was Real Time Live. Evan Hirsch, he sent a letter to the committee saying, I should do something like that to showcase things in 2009. I was like, okay, Evan, do it.
Which is now the Evening Theater, and we're always like, well, where's the game stuff? So when the current generation of Game Harbor came out, where they're all rendering at 1080p natively in high def, all of a sudden we now have the resolution problem licked. So then the next question came about, well then how do we get more real-time stuff in the conference? But also having a chair. So Ronen, when he came conference chair this year, had seen this concept we'd written years ago and thought now was the time to do it.
He put together the real-time thing, and that is going strong still, as far as I know. The venues are chosen as, a couple of years out. There's the conference advisory group, which does multi-year planning. So they picked New Orleans. Was it picked after Katrina? I think it was after Katrina. And I think everyone was happy to be able to kind of contribute to New Orleans coming back. There was concern of, will it be ready? Is it okay? And the New Orleans city representatives assured us that it would be, and it was. I think unless you went out of your way to go tour some of the hurricane disaster sites, which some of us did. That year, because the economy was hard, we introduced the ability to go cheap. At student rates, even if you weren't a student, if you're out of work or contract or something like that. So I think anyone who's out of work could go to the conference anyway, because maybe that's how you get a job. So we want to exclude people who are out of work. So conference committee did that. I also tried to make it, I felt like people in the committee, it started being about the committee. It's a bit too much of like cool kids are in the committee thing. So we didn't want to give ourselves too many perks. So we actually voted ourselves out of free conference admission afterwards. It used to be the conference chairs got the next 5 years free or something. And or 10 years, I forget. And we voted that out. So no one would get those perks. So we got rid of some perks just to make it more equitable and less about us and more about the content. I still have here in my mess of an office the poster from the SIGGRAPH 2009 conference.